Good morning, Skidaway. I'm so excited that you've joined me again today. It's hard to believe that we are on chapter 12 of Genesis because it means I've been with you for 12 weeks, and what a blessing it has been. So today I want to talk about Abram because that's where we are in Genesis 12. Up until this point, we've not seen God as a personal relationship with God. Now, don't get me wrong, Adam and Eve, we see that they had a personal relationship with God. I mean, hello, he walked with them in the cool of the morning in the garden, and that's an amazing thing. But following that fall into sin, what we see is a God who's given commandments, and we see where humanity has succeeded and failed in keeping those commandments and keeping that righteousness, that image of God. So we see Noah, who came up and was so named for let God remember us. And then we see all of the evil, the wickedness, and then we see the flood, and we see his descendants. And we talked about him and how he chose to mock righteousness. And we see him defy God. We see his descendants, Nimrod, defy God. And so we've watched the genealogy of the nations take place. And at this point in history, we've reached Abram. And this to me is where we see our personal God. We see our personal relationship with God begin to unfold. Because unlike all of the other characters we've seen in the Bible so far, we get to walk out a length of time with Abram and God's promises with Abram. But before we get there, once again, we see a commandment given. And Abram is told to leave his homeland, to leave his country of his birth. And he's told to leave his father's household, to leave those relatives, those people that he's grown up with. And he's told to go out to a land that God is going to show him. To me, it's a very scary thing. It's something that I've had to walk out in my own life, but not to the extent that Abram is, because I live in a time that my family is a phone call away. My family was a plane ride away. But for Abram, there was no such promise. He was walking into a dangerous land. He was leaving everything he knew to go on a journey, to go on an adventure with God. And as he adventures, we will get to walk through and see his personal growth with God. That sanctification is going to take place. And we see that he starts off very strong. He starts out following that commandment. But as we get down and he encounters some troubles, and he enters into Egypt, that he starts a relationship there with a lie, not trusting in God. And we see the consequences of that for Sarai, for Pharaoh's family, and for Abram. But I want to back up and talk again about what Abram's been called to do when he was called to leave, and why he was called to leave. And what God has called Abram out of is idolatry. That we see the breakdown of coming from Herky, which was this moon god, and being the city, the moon city. And what we see is God is calling him away from destruction. God is calling him to step out in faith, but to step out into light. And we see God working with us as we walk into light. I think it's an amazing thing that with Adam's journey, we see the beginning journey of sanctification for Abram, but also for us. When we walk out of sin, when we leave the bondages of slavery behind, and we walk out to meet God, to whatever land he's gonna put us in, what we're leaving behind is destruction, idolatry, sinfulness. And when we do that, God begins a work in us. And we may not start out perfectly. We know that we won't. It's not our nature. But that journey, man, what a light it's going to bring.